Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 11 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, detailed explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 11. Let's continue with question number 393. The topic for this question is VPN gateway. Here's the situation to consider. A company wants to connect its headquarters securely to an Azure virtual network over the internet. They choose to implement an Azure site-to-site VPN. What is the primary function of a site-to-site VPN in this scenario? Take a look at each choice. Option A is it provides an encrypted connection from an on-premises VPN device to an Azure virtual network gateway over the internet. Option B is it provides a dedicated, private, physical connection to Azure that bypasses the public internet entirely. Option C is it provides a secure connection for an individual remote worker's laptop to access the corporate network. Option D is it provides load balancing for web traffic across multiple Azure regions. In this case, choose option A. It provides an encrypted connection from an on-premises VPN device to an Azure virtual network gateway over the internet. Let's look at the reasoning. A site-to-site VPN securely connects an entire on-premises network via a local VPN router to an Azure virtual network via a virtual network gateway using IPsec-IK tunnels over the public internet. The other choices do not work because B, a dedicated, private connection that bypasses the internet describes Azure Express route. C, connecting an individual remote worker's device describes a point-to-site, P2S, VPN, not site-to-site. D, global web traffic routing can be handled by services such as Azure Front Door. It is unrelated to a site-to-site VPN. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Site-to-site VPN is equal to connects entire networks over the internet. Point-to-site VPN is equal to connects individual devices. ExpressRoute is equal to dedicated private connection, no internet. Now let's examine question number 394. Let's start with the scenario. An organization needs a cloud-based identity service for authenticating users to Azure and software as a service applications, with support for single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. Which service should the organization use? Let's compare the available options. Choice A, Microsoft Entra ID. Choice B, Microsoft Entra Domain Services. Choice C, Azure Role-Based Access Control. Choice D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The best choice is option A, Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra ID is Microsoft's cloud identity and access management service. It supports authentication features such as SSO, MFA, and passwordless methods. B. Microsoft Entra Domain Services provides managed domain capabilities such as Domain Join and LDAP. C. Azure RBAC authorizes access to Azure resources after identity is established. D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud assesses and improves cloud security posture. Exam tip. Microsoft Entra ID authenticates identities. Azure RBAC authorizes what those identities can do in Azure. Question number 395. The focus now shifts to identity and security. Here's the scenario. A security team is mapping current AZ-900 identity, authorization, and security posture services to their purposes. Match each service or feature to its primary purpose. The left column contains Left side choice 1, Microsoft Entra ID. Left side choice 2, Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC. Left side choice 3, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Here are the possible matches. Choice A on the right is provides cloud identity and authentication services. Choice B on the right is grants permissions to Azure resources at a defined scope. Choice C on the right is assesses cloud security posture and provides security recommendations. The matches work out like this. Pair Microsoft Entra ID and A provides cloud identity and authentication services. Pair Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC, and B grants permissions to Azure resources at a defined scope. Pair Microsoft Defender for Cloud and C assesses cloud security posture and provides security recommendations. Here's why. Microsoft Entra ID handles identities and authentication, Azure RBAC handles authorization to Azure resources, and Defender for Cloud evaluates security posture. The main takeaway is Entra ID authenticates, RBAC authorize, and Defender for Cloud assesses security posture. Question number 396. Needs a little extra thought. Pay close attention to what the scenario really requires. An enterprise has several Azure subscriptions and wants to apply governance policies and access controls to them as a single hierarchy. Which Azure scope should the enterprise use above the subscription level? Compare each option with the requirement. Consider option A, a management group. Consider option B, a resource group. Consider option C, an availability zone. Consider option D, a virtual network. The answer here is option A, a management group. This is the best choice because management groups provide a governance scope above subscriptions. Policies and access assignments applied at a management group can be inherited by subscriptions beneath it. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, a resource group organizes resources within a subscription. C, an availability zone, is a physically separate data center location within a region. D, a virtual network provides network isolation and connectivity. The hierarchy is management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, and resources. Let's take a look at question number 397. Next, let's move into storage services. First, let's review the situation. A media company needs a storage solution in Azure to hold thousands of large video files, high-resolution images, and unstructured document backups. Which Azure storage service is specifically optimized for storing these massive amounts of unstructured data? Here are the possible answers. Option A is Azure Blob Storage. Option B is Azure Files. Option C is Azure Table Storage. Option D is Azure Queue Storage. Go with option A, Azure Blob Storage. This works because Azure Blob Storage is Microsoft's object storage solution for the cloud. It is highly scalable and optimized for storing massive amounts of unstructured data, such as text or binary data, like videos, images, and backups. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. Azure Files provides fully managed file shares accessible via standard SMB or NFS protocols, typically used for legacy applications or file servers. C. Azure Table Storage stores no SQL structured data, key-value pairs. D. Azure Queue Storage is used for storing large numbers of messages to facilitate asynchronous communication between app components. A helpful shortcut is this. whenever a question mentions unstructured data, large objects, video files, or images, the answer is Azure Blob Storage. Let's work through question number 398. Take a moment to review this scenario. An IT administrator is reviewing identity protection features in Microsoft Entra ID. For each statement, select Yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select No. Statement 1, implementing single sign-on, SSO, requires all users to authenticate using the Microsoft Authenticator mobile app. Statement 2, authentication is the process of evaluating a user's permissions to determine which resources they can access. Statement 3, conditional access evaluates signals, such as user location or device state, during sign-in to decide whether to allow, require MFA, or block the request. The answer here is no. SSO simply allows users to sign in once to access multiple applications. It does not mandate the use of the Authenticator app. The answer here is no. Evaluating permissions is authorization. Authentication is simply verifying the user's identity, who they are. The answer here is yes. Conditional access uses if-then policies based on signals to enforce access controls. Here's a useful exam tip. Authentication is equal to verifying identity. Authorization is equal to verifying permissions access. Conditional access is equal to applying policies based on login signals. Let's take a look at question number 399. This question takes us into Azure RBAC. Let's start with the scenario. You are configuring an Azure virtual desktop environment. You need to assign specific users the ability to manage the host pools and application groups within the resource group. Which Azure feature should you use to grant these management permissions to the users? Now let's review the options. Choice A, Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC. Choice B, Resource Locks. Choice C, Azure Policy. Choice D, Network Security Groups, NSGS. The right response is option A, Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC. The main reason is Azure RBAC is the authorization system used to manage access to Azure resources. You assign RBAC roles, such as contributor, reader, or specific virtual desktop roles, to users, groups, or service principals at a specific scope to grant them permission to manage resources. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Resource locks prevent accidental deletion or modification of resources. They do not grant permissions. C. Azure Policy enforces rules on resource configurations to maintain compliance. It does not grant user permissions. D. NSGS control network traffic flow, not user management permissions. Keep this point in mind for the exam. To grant a user permission to manage, create, or view an Azure resource, you use Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC. Let's continue with question number 400. First, let's review the situation. A large enterprise operates several physical Windows servers in their local on-premises data center. The IT director wants to use Azure Policy and Microsoft Defender for Cloud to manage and secure these on-premises servers alongside their cloud resources from within the Azure portal. Which Azure service allows you to manage these on-premises servers as if they were Azure resources? Let's compare the available options. Choice A, Azure Arc. Choice B, Azure AD Connect, Microsoft Entra Connect. Choice C, Azure VPN Gateway. Choice D, Azure Express Route. In this case, choose option A, Azure Arc. Let's look at the reasoning. Azure Arc extends the Azure control plane, Azure Resource Manager, to non-Azure environments. It allows you to manage on-premises Windows and Linux servers, Kubernetes clusters, and multi-cloud resources from a single pane of glass in the Azure portal. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Microsoft Entra Connect synchronizes user identities, not server infrastructure management. C. Azure VPN Gateway establishes network connectivity, but does not extend Azure management tools to the local servers. D. ExpressRoute provides a private network connection, not infrastructure management. Exam tip. Whenever you need to project on-premises or multi-cloud servers into Azure for centralized management, like applying Azure policy, the answer is Azure Arc. Now let's examine question number 401. Here's the situation to consider. An administrator must prevent accidental deletion of a critical Azure storage account while still allowing authorized users to read and modify its data. Which governance feature should the administrator apply to the storage account? Now let's review the options. Option A is a delete resource lock. Option B is a resource tag. Option C is an Azure policy exemption. Option D is a read-only RBAC role. Go with option A. A delete resource lock. A delete lock prevents the resource from being deleted while still allowing permitted modification operations. The other choices do not work because B. A tag adds metadata but does not prevent deletion. C. A policy exemption excludes a resource from a policy evaluation. It does not protect deletion. D. A read-only role restricts a user's permissions but does not prevent all authorized identities from deleting the resource. The main takeaway is a delete lock permits modification but blocks deletion. A read-only lock blocks both modification and deletion. Now for question number 402. Here's what is happening. An administrator is reviewing foundational Azure Virtual Network concepts. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, an Azure Virtual Network provides an isolated network for Azure resources. The second statement says, a subnet divides a virtual network address space into smaller network segments. The third statement says, Azure Virtual Network peering sends traffic between peered networks over the public internet by default. Statement 1 should be marked yes. A virtual network is a logically isolated network boundary for Azure resources. Statement 2 should be marked yes. Subnets partition the virtual network address space for organization and control. Statement 3 should be marked no. Peering traffic uses Microsoft's private backbone rather than the public internet. VNets are isolated by default. Peering connects them privately over the Microsoft backbone. Next up is question number 403. We are moving on to Azure Pricing Calculator. A company is planning an Azure deployment and wants to estimate the expected monthly cost before creating any resources. Which Azure tool should the company use? Option A, Azure Pricing Calculator. Option B, Azure Service Health. Option C, Azure Monitor. Option D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The best choice is option A, Azure Pricing Calculator. Here's why. The Azure Pricing Calculator converts anticipated service configurations and usage into an estimated cost for planning and budgeting before deployment. B. Azure Service Health reports incidents, maintenance, and advisories. C. Azure Monitor collects and analyzes operational telemetry. D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud assesses security posture and provides recommendations. A helpful shortcut is this. Use the pricing calculator for planned costs and cost management for actual and forecasted spending. Let's work through question number 404. Take a moment to review this scenario. A new developer is setting up their workstation and wants to know which tools are supported for interacting with Azure resources. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. You can only manage Azure Cloud services from devices running the Windows operating system. Now check statement 2. You can manage Azure Cloud services programmatically using command line tools. Now check statement 3. You can manage Azure Cloud services using a standard web browser on a macOS device. The first statement is no. Azure can be managed from macOS, Linux, or mobile devices using the browser, CLI, or mobile app. The second statement is yes. Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, and Azure Cloud Shell allow for command line management and automation. The third statement is yes. The Azure portal is web-based and fully supported on Safari, Chrome, Edge, or Firefox running on macOS. Here's a useful exam tip. Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell are cross-platform tools, meaning they can run on Windows, macOS, and Linux. Here comes question number 405. This question takes us into Defender for Cloud. Consider this situation. An organization wants a service that continually assesses Azure and hybrid resources, provides security recommendations, and summarizes security posture with a secure score. Which Azure service should the organization use? The choices are: Choice A. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Choice B. Azure Monitor. Choice C. Azure Service Health. Choice D. Microsoft Cost Management. The answer here is option A, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. This is the best choice because Microsoft Defender for Cloud provides cloud security posture management, security recommendations, and a secure score for supported environments. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, Azure Monitor collects metrics, logs, and application telemetry. C, Azure Service Health reports Azure platform issues and planned maintenance. D, Microsoft Cost Management analyzes and controls cloud spending. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Defender for Cloud improves security posture, Azure Monitor observes operational performance. Let's work through question number 406. Take a moment to review this scenario. An organization wants to require specific tags and restrict Azure resource deployments to approved regions. Which Azure governance service should the organization use? Take a look at each choice. Option A is Azure Policy. Option B is Azure Role-Based Access Control. Option C is Resource Locks. Option D is Azure Service Health. The right response is option A, Azure Policy. This works because Azure Policy evaluates resources against organizational rules and can enforce requirements such as mandatory tags and allowed deployment locations. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. Azure RBAC controls who can perform actions on resources. C. Resource locks protect resources from modification or deletion. D. Azure Service Health reports service incidents and maintenance. Exam tip. Azure Policy governs resource configuration. Azure RBAC governs user permissions. Now let's examine question number 407. We are moving on to Defender for Cloud. Let's start with the scenario. An IT compliance manager needs to evaluate whether their deployed Azure resources meet specific industry standards, such as ISO 27001 or PCI DSS. From which Azure Service Dashboard can the manager view the current regulatory compliance posture of their workloads? Here are the possible answers. Choice A. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Choice B. Azure Advisor. Choice C. Azure Monitor. Choice D. Microsoft Cost Management. Go with option A. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The main reason is Microsoft Defender for Cloud continually assesses your hybrid cloud environment against security best practices and compliance frameworks. It features a regulatory compliance dashboard where you can check your posture against standards like ISO, PCI DSS, and SOC. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Azure Advisor provides general well-architected framework recommendations, cost, performance, but not formal regulatory compliance audits. C. Azure Monitor collects metrics and logs. It does not map them to regulatory frameworks. D. Cost management handles billing and budgets, not security compliance. The main takeaway is to check the ongoing regulatory compliance of your deployed Azure resources against frameworks like PCI or ISO. Use the regulatory compliance dashboard in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Here's an important one. Question number 408. The key situation is this. A network administrator is reviewing foundational Azure virtual networking concepts. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, an Azure virtual network enables Azure resources to communicate securely with each other. The second statement says, subnets divide a virtual network address space into smaller network segments. The third statement says, virtual network peering requires traffic between the connected virtual networks to travel over the public internet. For statement 1, choose yes. A virtual network provides an isolated network environment for Azure resources. For statement 2, choose yes. Subnets organize and segment resources within a virtual network. For statement 3, choose no. Peering routes traffic privately across the Microsoft backbone network. Virtual networks provide private Azure networking. Subnets segment them, and peering connects them over the Microsoft backbone. Here comes question number 409. The focus now shifts to authentication methods. Here's what is happening. An organization wants employees to sign in by using Windows Hello, a security key, or the Microsoft Authenticator app without entering a password. Which authentication approach meets this requirement? Review the options. Choice A. Passwordless authentication. Choice B. Single sign-on, SSO. Choice C. Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC. Choice D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. In this case, choose option A. Passwordless authentication. Let's look at the reasoning. Passwordless authentication verifies users through methods such as Windows Hello, FIDO2 security keys, or Microsoft Authenticator without requiring a traditional password. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. SSO reduces repeated sign-ins across applications, but does not necessarily remove passwords. C. Azure RBAC controls authorization to Azure resources after identity verification. D. Defender for Cloud evaluates and improves cloud security posture. A helpful shortcut is this. Passwordless authentication replaces passwords. SSO reduces how often users must authenticate. Let's take a look at question number 410. First, let's review the situation. A company wants customers on the internet to access an Azure service through an internet routable address. Which type of endpoint should the service use? Here are the possible answers. Choice A, a public endpoint. Choice B, a private endpoint. Choice C, virtual network peering. Choice D, an Azure VPN gateway. The answer here is option A. A public endpoint. A public endpoint exposes an Azure service through a publicly routable address so that clients on the internet can reach it. The other choices do not work because B. A private endpoint assigns a private IP address from a virtual network and avoids public internet exposure. C. Virtual network peering connects virtual networks. It is not an endpoint type. D. A VPN gateway provides encrypted connectivity between networks or clients and a virtual network. Here's a useful exam tip. Public endpoints are internet reachable. Private endpoints use private IP addresses inside virtual networks. Next up is question number 411. Next, let's move into storage redundancy. Here's the scenario. You are configuring an Azure storage account to hold development testing data. Because the data can be easily regenerated, you select locally redundant storage (LRS) to minimize costs. How many copies of your data are maintained within a single physical data center when using locally redundant storage (LRS)? Here are the options. Option A 1. Option B 2. Option C 3. Option D 4. The best choice is option C 3. Here's why. Locally redundant storage (LRS) provides the lowest cost redundancy option by maintaining 3 synchronous copies of your data within a single physical data center in the primary region. A. Azure Storage always maintains at least 3 copies to protect against hardware failures. B. 2 copies are not a standard Azure Storage redundancy option. D. No standard redundancy option uses 4 copies in a single data center. Keep this point in mind for the exam. LRS maintains 3 copies in one data center. ZRS maintains 3 copies across 3 data centers, zones. GRS maintains 6 copies, 3 in primary, 3 in secondary. Question number 412. Your Chief Information Security Officer wants a high-level metric that reflects the organization's current security posture across all Azure subscriptions. Which Azure service provides a secure score to fulfill this requirement? Review the options. Choice A. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Choice B. Azure Advisor. Choice C. Azure Monitor. Choice D. Microsoft Purview. The right response is option A. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. This is the best choice because Microsoft Defender for Cloud continuously assesses your resources against security best practices and provides a secure score, which is a percentage that reflects the overall security posture of your environment. The remaining options can be eliminated because B. Azure Advisor provides security recommendations, powered by Defender for Cloud, but the secure score metric itself is a core feature of Defender for Cloud. C. Azure Monitor collects logs and telemetry for performance and availability monitoring. D. Microsoft Purview is used for data governance and compliance, not for generating an infrastructure secure score. Exam tip. The secure score is a key feature of Microsoft Defender for Cloud, providing a quantifiable measurement of your security posture. Now for question number 413. Consider this situation. An organization operates in a highly regulated industry and must ensure that its Azure infrastructure complies with the ISO 27001 standard. Which Azure service should you use to evaluate your environment against specific regulatory compliance frameworks? Here are the options. Option A. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Option B. Azure Advisor. Option C. Azure Service Health. Option D. Azure Monitor. In this case, choose option A. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. This works because Microsoft Defender for Cloud includes a regulatory compliance dashboard that assesses your hybrid cloud environment against specific industry standards and regulations, such as ISO 27001, PCI DSS, and SOC/TSP. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. Azure Advisor provides general best practice recommendations, including security, but it does not map those recommendations to formal regulatory compliance frameworks. C. Azure Service Health tracks Azure platform outages and maintenance, not resource compliance. D. Azure Monitor tracks application and infrastructure performance telemetry. The main takeaway is to track how well your deployed resources comply with specific regulatory standards, like ISO or PCI. Use Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Let's continue with question number 414. The focus now shifts to authentication methods. Here's the situation to consider. When employees attempt to access a corporate application, they are required to enter their password and then approve a notification sent to the Microsoft Authenticator app on their mobile phone. This process is an example of which security concept? Let's compare the available options. Option A is multi-factor authentication, MFA. Option B is single sign-on, SSO. Option C is role-based access control, RBAC. Option D is conditional access. Go with option A, multi-factor authentication, MFA. The main reason is multi-factor authentication, MFA, requires a user to provide two or more forms of verification. In this scenario, the user provides something they know, a password, and something they have, a trusted mobile device receiving a notification. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Single sign-on, SSO, allows a user to sign in once to access multiple applications. C. Role-based access control, RBAC, determines what an authenticated user is authorized to do, not how they prove their identity. D. Conditional access is the policy engine that might require MFA based on signals, but the act of providing two forms of verification is MFA itself. MFA requires two or more elements, something you know, password, something you have, phone token, or something you are, biometrics. See how you handle question number 415. Before choosing, identify the key constraint. An operations team wants to deploy and manage cloud resources through a web portal, command line tools, PowerShell, and reusable templates. Which cloud benefit does this requirement describe? Use the details in the question to eliminate options. Next, option A, manageability. Next, option B, high availability. Next, option C, predictability. Next, option D, scalability. The right response is option A, manageability. Let's look at the reasoning. Cloud manageability includes using portals, command line tools, APIs, and templates to deploy, configure, and monitor resources consistently. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. High availability focuses on keeping services accessible during failures. C. Predictability concerns expected performance and cost. D. Scalability is the ability to add or remove resources as demand changes. A helpful shortcut is this. Manageability is about how resources are deployed, configured, monitored, and automated. Let's continue with question number 416. First, let's review the situation. A CIO is explaining public, private, and hybrid cloud deployment models. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. In a public cloud, the cloud provider owns and operates the underlying infrastructure used by multiple customers. Statement 2. A private cloud is dedicated to a single organization. Statement 3. A hybrid cloud uses only public cloud resources. The first statement is yes. The provider operates shared cloud infrastructure while isolating customer workloads. The second statement is yes. Private cloud resources are reserved for one organization. The third statement is no. Hybrid cloud integrates public cloud with private cloud or on-premises resources. Here's a useful exam tip. Public is provider-operated and shared, private is dedicated, hybrid combines public and private or on-premises environments. Now let's examine question number 417. Let's start with the scenario. You need to run a bash script to manage Azure resources, but you do not want to install any Azure tools or dependencies on your local workstation. Which Azure tool provides an interactive, authenticated, browser-based shell environment? Now let's review the options. Choice A, Azure Cloud Shell. Choice B, Azure Resource Manager, ARM. Choice C, Microsoft Entra Admin Center. Choice D, Azure Advisor. The answer here is option A, Azure Cloud Shell. Azure Cloud Shell is an interactive, authenticated, browser-accessible shell for managing Azure resources. It provides the flexibility of choosing the shell experience that best suits the way you work, either Bash or PowerShell, directly from within the Azure portal without installing local tools. The other choices do not work because B, ARM is the deployment and management service for Azure, not an interactive shell interface. C, the Entra Admin Center manages identities. D, Advisor provides best practice recommendations. Keep this point in mind for the exam. If you need to run CLI or PowerShell commands from a web browser without installing local software, use Azure Cloud Shell. Let's work through question number 418. This question takes us into Defender for Cloud. Take a moment to review this scenario. A security team wants a service that continuously assesses Azure, hybrid, and multi-cloud resources, provides security recommendations, and shows the organization's security posture. Which Azure service should the team use? Take a look at each choice. Option A is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Option B is Azure Service Health. Option C is Microsoft Cost Management. Option D is Azure Monitor. The best choice is option A, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Here's why. Microsoft Defender for Cloud assesses cloud resources, provides security recommendations and helps organizations understand and improve their cloud security posture. B. Service Health reports Azure service incidents and planned maintenance. C. Cost management analyzes and controls cloud spending. D. Azure Monitor collects and analyzes operational telemetry. Exam tip. Defender for Cloud focuses on cloud security posture and workload protection. Let's take a look at question number 419. Here's the situation to consider. An organization wants sign-in policies that evaluate signals such as user risk, device state, and location, and then require multi-factor authentication or block access. Which Microsoft Entra feature should be used? Now let's review the options. Option A is conditional access. Option B is Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC. Option C is Single Sign-On, SSO. Option D is Azure Policy. The answer here is option A, conditional access. This is the best choice because conditional access evaluates identity-driven signals and enforces access decisions, such as requiring MFA or blocking a signing. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, Azure RBAC determines what an authenticated identity can do with Azure resources. C, SSO lets users access multiple applications after one signing. D, Azure Policy enforces standards on Azure resource configurations. The main takeaway is conditional access uses sign-in signals to decide whether to allow, block, or require extra verification. Question number 420. An IT administrator is reviewing the capabilities of Azure Advisor to optimize the company's cloud environment. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check Statement 1. Azure Advisor provides recommendations to help reduce the cost of running Azure virtual machines. Now check Statement 2. Azure Advisor provides recommendations to improve the security posture of Azure resources. Now check Statement 3. Azure Advisor provides recommendations on how to configure specific firewall rules for an on-premises network. The answer here is yes. Advisor identifies idle or underutilized virtual machines and recommends resizing or shutting them down to save money. The answer here is yes. Advisor integrates with Microsoft Defender for Cloud to display actionable security recommendations. The answer here is no. Azure Advisor analyzes Azure resources, not the configuration of your internal on-premises network hardware. Azure Advisor provides actionable recommendations across 5 categories: cost, security, reliability, operational excellence, and performance. Question number 421. An administrator wants personalized notifications about Azure outages, planned maintenance, and health advisories that could affect the organization's subscriptions. Which Azure service should the administrator use? Options. Option A, Azure Service Health. Option B, Azure Monitor. Option C, Azure Advisor. Option D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. In this case, choose option A, Azure Service Health. This works because Azure Service Health provides personalized information and alerts about service incidents, planned maintenance, and advisories that affect your Azure resources and regions. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. Azure Monitor collects and analyzes resource and application telemetry. C. Azure Advisor provides optimization recommendations. D. Defender for Cloud assesses security posture and protects workloads. A helpful shortcut is this. Service health is personalized to your environment. Azure Status provides a broader public view of Azure service availability. Here comes question number 422. Next, let's move into IaaS PaaS SaaS. Here's the scenario. A development team is migrating a legacy web application to Azure App Service, which is a platform as a service PaaS offering. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. A PaaS solution like Azure App Service gives developers full administrative control over the underlying operating system. Now check statement 2. A PaaS solution like Azure App Service can automatically scale the hosting resources based on application demand. Now check statement 3. A PaaS solution like Azure App Service requires the cloud provider to write the custom application code. For statement 1, choose no. PaaS abstracts the operating system. If you need full OS control, you must use Infrastructure as a Service IaaS. For statement 2, choose yes. PaaS offerings typically include built-in, configurable auto-scaling capabilities, elasticity. For statement 3, choose no. In PaaS, the customer is always responsible for the application code and data. Here's a useful exam tip. In a PaaS model, you manage the applications and data. The cloud provider manages the runtime, middleware, OS, virtualization, servers, storage, and networking. Now for question number 423. Here's what is happening. A company has two workloads. A legacy application requires full control of its operating system. A separate event-driven task should run code automatically without managing servers. Which two Azure compute options should the company use? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Choose the best two responses. Option A, Azure Virtual Machines. Option B, Azure Functions. Option C, Azure Blob Storage. Option D, Azure Virtual Network. Option E, Azure Policy. You should choose option A, Azure Virtual Machines, and option B, Azure Functions. The main reason is Azure Virtual Machines provide operating system control for the legacy application. Azure Functions provides serverless, event-driven code execution without requiring the customer to manage servers. Now let's rule out the other options. C. Blob storage stores unstructured object data. D. A virtual network provides networking, not application execution. E. Azure Policy enforces governance standards on resources. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Use virtual machines for operating system control and Azure Functions for event-driven serverless code. Question number 424. Let's go. We are moving on to Microsoft Entra ID. Scenario. An organization needs a cloud-based identity and access management service to manage users and groups and provide authentication and single sign-on. Which service should the organization use? Option A, Microsoft Entra ID. Option B, Azure Key Vault. Option C, Azure Monitor. Option D, Microsoft Purview. Go with option A, Microsoft Entra ID. Let's look at the reasoning. Microsoft Entra ID is Azure's cloud-based identity and access management service for users, groups, authentication, and access to applications and resources. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Key Vault stores application secrets, keys, and certificates. C. Azure Monitor collects and analyzes telemetry. D. Microsoft Purview provides data governance and compliance capabilities. Exam tip. Microsoft Entra ID manages identities and authentication. Azure RBAC controls permissions to Azure resources. Let's take a look at question number 425. Let's start with the scenario. A company is planning a new Azure workload and wants to estimate its expected monthly cost before deploying any resources. Which Azure tool should the company use? Let's compare the available options. Choice A. Azure Pricing Calculator. Choice B. Microsoft Cost Management. Choice C. Azure Advisor. Choice D. Azure Service Health. The right response is option A. Azure Pricing Calculator. The Azure Pricing Calculator estimates expected costs for planned Azure services based on selected regions, sizes, tiers, and usage assumptions. The other choices do not work because B. Cost Management analyzes and controls costs after usage data is available. C. Azure Advisor recommends ways to optimize deployed resources. D. Service Health reports incidents and maintenance affecting Azure services. The main takeaway is use the pricing calculator before deployment, use cost management to analyze actual and forecasted spending. Take a careful look at question number 426. Next, let's move into authentication methods. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. A user attempts to log into an Azure web application. The system prompts the user to provide a username and a one-time passcode sent to their phone to verify who they claim to be. This process of establishing the identity of a user is known as _____________________________________________________________________________________________________. See which choices you can rule out. Next, option A. Authorization. Next, option B. Authentication. Next, option C. Conditional access. Next, option D. Role-based access control, RBAC. The best choice is option B. Authentication. Here's why. Authentication is the process of proving that a user or service is who they claim to be. Requesting credentials, like a username and passcode, is the mechanism for authentication. Authorization occurs after authentication and determines what resources the verified user is allowed to access. C. Conditional access uses signals to enforce policies, which may include requiring authentication, but the core act of proving identity is authentication. D. RBAC is an authorization system used to assign permissions. Authentication is equal to identity, who are you? Authorization is equal to access, what can you do? Now let's examine question number 427. First, let's review the situation. An organization is evaluating a hybrid cloud strategy. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, a hybrid cloud combines public cloud services with private cloud or on-premises infrastructure. The second statement says, a hybrid cloud can provide flexibility in deciding where workloads and data are hosted. The third statement says, adopting a hybrid cloud eliminates the organization's responsibility for all on-premises hardware. Statement 1 should be marked yes. Integration of public and private or on-premises environments defines hybrid cloud. Statement 2 should be marked yes. Workloads can be placed according to technical, regulatory, or business requirements. Statement 3 should be marked no. The organization remains responsible for the on-premises components it operates. A helpful shortcut is this. Hybrid cloud adds flexibility but does not remove responsibility for retained on-premises infrastructure. Next up is question number 428. This question takes us into Azure pricing. Consider this situation. A startup is modeling their Azure budget and wants to understand how different actions affect their monthly bill. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Deploying workloads to Azure allows a company to shift from a capital expenditure (CapEx) model to an operational expenditure (OPEX) model. Statement 2. If you deploy two identical Azure virtual machines, same size and region, they are guaranteed to generate the exact same monthly cost regardless of how they are used. Statement 3. When an Azure virtual machine is stopped, deallocated, you stop paying for compute, but you continue to pay for the managed disks attached to it. Statement 1 should be marked yes. Azure uses a consumption-based pricing model, treating infrastructure as an operating expense rather than an upfront capital investment. Statement 2 should be marked no. Costs vary based on uptime, outbound data transfer, egress, and storage transactions, meaning usage dictates the final bill. Statement 3 should be marked yes. Compute billing stops upon deallocation, but storage resources persistently reserve space and continue to incur charges. Here's a useful exam tip. Virtual machine costs are rarely identical because outbound network bandwidth, egress, and storage transactions are billed based on actual usage. Next, question number 429. An architect is documenting the Azure services used in a new architecture to assign management responsibilities. Select the appropriate cloud service model for each Azure resource. Let's work through the blanks one at a time. For the first statement, Azure virtual machines are an example of the blank. Choose between 1. Infrastructure as a service, IaaS, Platform as a service, PaaS, or Software as a Service, SaaS. For the second statement, Azure SQL Database is an example of the blank. Choose between 2. Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS, Platform as a Service, PaaS, or Software as a Service, SaaS. The answer for statement 1 is Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS. The customer is responsible for the operating system, making it IaaS. The answer for statement 2 is Platform as a Service, PaaS. The provider manages the database platform and underlying infrastructure, making it PaaS. Keep this point in mind for the exam. If you have to patch the operating system, like on AVM, it is IaaS. If Microsoft patches the operating system and platform, it is PaaS. Let's continue with question number 430. Take a moment to review this scenario. An administrator wants a cross-platform command line tool for creating and managing Azure resources from Windows, macOS, or Linux. Which tool should the administrator use? Here are the possible answers. Option A is Azure CLI. Option B is Azure Portal. Option C is Azure Advisor. Option D is Azure Service Health. The answer here is option A, Azure CLI. This is the best choice because Azure CLI is a cross-platform command line tool used to create and manage Azure resources. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, the Azure Portal is a browser-based graphical interface. C, Azure Advisor provides optimization recommendations. D, Azure Service Health reports service incidents and maintenance. Exam tip. Azure CLI is cross-platform. Azure PowerShell uses PowerShell CMDLets. Cloud Shell provides both tools in a browser. You have completed part 11 of the AZ-900 practice question series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more cloud certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.